Thanks for joining the call. I have Stacy Morris with me right now. She is a strength coach, a physical therapist. She works with gymnasts and athletes. You have 213 or 240,000 Instagram followers. And I have to say that the exercises that you put out on Instagram are very impressive. You have a huge variety of different exercises. So thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. This is really exciting. So I'm glad I can share some of my knowledge with some people.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I really appreciate your time. And we're kind of in a we're in our house right now because we're in quarantine due to the COVID outbreak. So this is a really weird time to be a physical therapist and to be in the fitness industry because we've never seen anything like this before.
Absolutely. Yeah, I see people coming out with, home workouts all the time right now, which is crazy because, just a week ago, it was still like very gym-based workouts. And now everything's kind of shifted and everything's now online. So we're just adapting with the times, aren't we?
Yeah, we have to constantly adapt. But yeah, I wanted to get into a little bit of just talking about the population that you work with. You're so niche. I like following your account because the group of people that you work with, it's so specific. It seems everybody is an athlete. Everybody's doing exercises that it seems to be complex, or at least it looks very innovative. Do you come up with all those exercises on your own?
Yeah, I do actually. I mean, sometimes I draw ideas from other things that I've seen or done in the past, and I use kind of like fundamentals to like build off of things. But yeah, I like to play around with exercises and challenge each person appropriately depending on their sport. So I do come up with some pretty unique ideas at times, especially for like gymnasts.
Yeah, in typical clinic settings, at least in my setting here in San Diego, we don't see super high level athletes all the time. And so a lot of those exercises I'm not able to do because it's just too complex. The complexity and the level of skill that's involved is more appropriate for a higher level athlete. And so what kind of population, you kind of talked about it already, but what kind of population do you work with, and what are some of the needs that they have?
So I work with, I would say at this point, 95% are athletes. I would say about 50% of those are strength athletes and 50% are gymnasts. So strength athletes could be, power lifters, CrossFitters, strongman competitors, or Olympic weightlifters primarily. I mean, I do get like some Highland Games competitors and then some, just other sports too. But for a majority of it, it's just those two areas, strength or gymnastics. So a lot of it's more strength based or like flexibility, mobility, and then learning how to control their body awareness sort of thing for gymnasts. And most of my patients are pretty much younger. I would say 50% are under the age of 21.
That's really young. So are a lot of them coming from high schools
Mhm.
or even collegiate level as well?
Yeah, so I have a lot of club gymnastics. For gymnastics, there's high school and there's club, but mostly it's just club gymnastics. And then I get a lot of like right before college or right out, during breaks, or even if, right now everyone's home because they can't go to college. So I'm getting a lot more of the collegiate gymnasts coming in.
How did you get into working with that group of people? Were you a gymnast yourself? What's your background?
Yeah, I did gymnastics for 18 years. So I did it from when I was 4 years old till I was 22. I got a full ride for gymnastics to Illinois State University. So I finished out my career, and then, everyone knows that I'm a gymnast, or I was a gymnast. So I speak the language, I walk the walk, talk the talk. So it's really easy to build that relationship with gymnasts, gymnast parents, and even coaches.
So it's interesting that you have a gymnast background, but yet I see you snatching weight up over your head like a
Yeah.
CrossFit athlete or like a power lifter. So did you make a transition into that at some point, or were you always interested in strength training?
Yeah, so after I finished gymnastics, I was first a performance coach, a strength and performance coach for about a year and a half. And during that time, I just kind of learned how to do more of like the strength-based things because I didn't have any training on like squatting and deadlifting and all that stuff before. So I learned that. And then I started going into bodybuilding first. I competed in bodybuilding, and then I found powerlifting, and then I competed in powerlifting. And this was all during physical therapy school. And then I found Olympic weightlifting, and I competed in Olympic weightlifting, and I've stuck with Olympic weightlifting since. And so I've been doing it for about 7 years now.
That's great. Typically, when people think of physical therapy, the old idea of physical therapy was that people would use these TheraBands, light resistance bands, do very simple exercises. But you've certainly taken it away from the whole idea of doing clams and bridges all day long into doing more complex movement and training for the actual activities and sports that your clients have to be able to do. So that's a really unique background that you have. So I wanted to, and it's something that's very needed as well, because the physical therapy professionals, they have a certain way that they think, and then you have the strength coaches and the people that are more working with higher level athletes, like for a sports team, for example, or for a university team. And there's differences in the way that each person approaches an athlete, and you seem to have perspectives on both of these professionals, and so that's really unique. So how has that been? How has it been being a physical therapist and yet being like a strength coach? It seems like you have both roles and wear both hats.
Yeah, honestly, when people look at me and look what I do, I would think that a majority of people, if they didn't know my background, would think that I'm like a strength and performance coach. They don't understand that, like, if you do it well enough, it looks the same. You can bridge those lines and like blur the gap really easily. And so I think that, like, I can take someone at very basic level, and at just post-surgical, and then I can bring them all the way back up to releasing them to their sport without ever having them see someone else. And I think that's kind of cool, because then maybe you can get that continued care. You can build that rapport, that relationship, and that trust. And I think that that's huge, because they understand, like, all right, I know that you can take me. You're the person that understands injury, understands anatomy, understands biomechanics, but also understands my sport and the demands of my sport, and can get me back to what I need to do. And so I just think that being able to have that kind of experience has really separated me from a lot of my colleagues. I had a kind of a different idea of how things were when I went to physical therapy school. So a lot of people were like, oh, let's think about exercises to help, X, Y, or Z. And my exercises were like way different than any of my other classmates. But I really do think that just having that background, that personal training, that sports and performance coach, it does really separate me, especially when it comes to working with my ideal population.
So getting a little bit more specifically in talking about the way that you approach a certain injury, for example, well, first off, let's talk about maybe some of the common injuries that you do work with, and then let's get into maybe some more of the details about how you would approach that specific type of problem,
Okay.
because your approach is unique. And so, what are some common injuries that you're seeing right now?
So if you're a power lifter, predominantly I see low back pain. They usually have pain during squats or deadlifts. That's pretty common. That's the number one most common. The second most common is shoulder or pec pain, from bench pressing. If you're an Olympic weightlifter, I see a lot of knee problems, a lot of like quad tendon, a lot of patellar tendon, because they're squatting a lot. Like every day is a squat day when you're an Olympic weightlifter is the joke, because it is. You have to squat literally every day. And then the other one most common would be also shoulder, because you do need to require a lot of stability overhead. And if they have any sort of instability, then they're going to be obviously more prone to getting an injury. So those are the two most common in those two sports. I would say for gymnasts, it's going to be spinal fractures, which is, it's really sad, but it's kind of the truth of the sport. Like, it's a lot of repetitive stress to the spine, being in that extreme extension position. And between the ages of like 12 and 15, I would say half of the patients that come in and see me have a spinal fracture or a spondylolisthesis, which is frustrating to see, but it's just part of the sport, like I said. And then the other most common thing is like an ankle sprain, because when you land on those floors or that surface, it's really easy to just roll your ankle.
And I see some of the exercises that you do, for example, if you're working with a gymnast and they're really flexible,
Mm-hmm.
it seems that you're doing exercises where they're getting into these extreme positions because that's what they need to do for their sport.
Right.
And so a lot of people are a little bit confused when you hear the terms like mobility versus flexibility. Those are sort of thrown out there. And so could you explain some of like how you approach the differences between what it means to be flexible, what it means to be mobile, and maybe even, yeah. So how would you explain those terms, and how does that apply to some of these injuries?
Okay, so I tell people that flexibility it refers to the muscle. How much can that muscle extend? So, yes, flexibility usually is a prerequisite for mobility, but usually passive movement isn't what's needed. Like you can get into a position, but that might not mean that you can get out of that position. And that's where like mobility and control comes into play. But from a joint perspective, mobility is about how much accessible movement you have at that joint. So you have passive mobility and you have active mobility. And so flexibility is the same to me as passive mobility. Like you can get into a position, but you might not be able to have the strength or the control to be able to move within that position, which would if you can't access or control that movement, you are definitely increasing your risk of gaining an injury within that movement. So for the gymnast, what I do is, I look at their flexibility and yeah, their splits are like this, right? But that's passive mobility or flexibility. And then when I have them show me what they can control, they might only control this much. So between this and this, I call that the zone of injury. That's the area that they could get hurt or where they tend to strain their hamstrings or their quads because they don't have the strength to be able to control that specific movement. So what I do is I have them get into certain positions and then lift off and control something and then set it back down. So if they're holding their leg up by their face, I'll have them let go of their leg, try to hold their leg up in place and see kind of how much it drops down to show me how much mobility, active mobility they have. So that's just some stuff that I do because gymnasts tend to get muscle strains at the in range of their motion, which like I said, is at that in range of a split, in range of a straddle jump, in range of any kind of like shoulder movement. So I want to work with them and train that movement so then they don't have an injury when they get in that sort of situation again.
Yeah, the exercise where you're holding up the head, holding up the leg by the head. I was doing that the other day and, it didn't feel really good.
Nice.
I've never thought of moving that way. I don't think my body can do that. But there's differences. The most people don't have that amount of motion, the ability to bring your leg up all the way. But a gymnast has to be able to control that motion. And so that's what you're saying is that the first thing is they need to have the passive motion. So what you're saying is they need to have the ability in that joint to actually move. And so you can stretch them and they might have that. But it's more than just that. They need to be able to control that extra range of motion. They need to be able to control it and have the strength. Otherwise you can get an injury. And that's what you're seeing with some of these gymnasts.
Yeah.
And some of the other injuries. So what about like with lower back pain, the population, for example, that you work with, you're working with power lift or, CrossFitters or power lifters. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I'll see somebody like that will be dealing with those issues, but when it comes to training, they might be getting those injuries again while they're training, and they may not have pain at any other point in their day. Usually when I'm seeing people with lower back pain, it might be because of a repeated movement or because of they have an office job and they're in one position too long. And so, and I use an approach called the McKenzie method, which looks at these different body positions and movements. And I always tell them that this, like rehabbing your lower back pain's a couple different parts. The first part is through the McKenzie method, you're correcting this issue with their movement, with the, this supposed abnormal position in the way that the joint is resting. And so you're correcting that. Then you got to move on into controlling movement and getting stronger. But with you, it seems that a lot of these injuries are happening specifically because of this load and this external force that's put on the body that they need to control. So how could somebody, we can't really say the word prevent injury, but how could somebody reduce their risk of injury, or how could they reduce the prevalence of an injury? If you're someone that has a lower back pain.
Okay, yeah. I always tell like some of my athletes that it's all about like what you said, external load. So if the external load is higher than what your internal load can actually control, so if your strength isn't high enough to be able to control whatever external load it is, then you're going to eventually get injured. It might not be today, it might be, years down the road, but, you'll have that wear and tear over time, and eventually, your body won't be able to handle it anymore. So the only way in my mind to be able to reduce your risk of getting an injury is to be able to increase your tissue tolerance, to build resiliency, to improve the strength of every single muscle within the body So then your internal capacity goes up, and then it doesn't matter what the external load is because your internal strength is higher and you can always do whatever you need to do without getting an injury. So some things we do for back pain is deadlifts. We do, back extensions. We do Chinese planks. That's one of my go-tos for low back pain. And that's just essentially like your shoulders are on a bench and your feet are on a bench, and you're just lifting your hips up and maintaining that tension in your entire posterior chain, which is building a lot of tension in the low back. And so I even have them like put a plate over their hips and hold that for a minute. And you would be surprised at how quickly you'll fatigue just by doing that sort of exercise. And that can be done anywhere, but that is improving your tissue tolerance, improving your strength, improving your tissue capacity to do more work and handle more volume.
So some of these injuries might be coming on because that tissue has not adapted or it has not had sufficient time to adapt.
Mm-hmm.
Then somebody starts, you see got a special offer for the local CrossFit gym, and you're going to start to now lift weights and get in the best shape of your life, but you haven't allowed sufficient time for that tissue to adapt. And specifically, if you're going to be doing deadlifts and you're trying to work on, and you're going to be stressing or putting some tension onto the posterior chain, which are the muscles in the glutes and hamstrings and the back extensors, you need to train something like that with like a Chinese plank, for example. I didn't even really know what that was until I saw it on your page recently. I saw it this week, and yeah, it looked really interesting, having the feet up on a bench, and it's like almost like a reverse plank, like a straight leg bridge.
Yeah, it's really cool. I mean, a lot of people, you could do that, like I said, like anywhere, but I have them obviously do it with as much weight and as long as time as they can handle. So I tell them to do not for 1 minute, not for 2 minutes, not 30 seconds. I say max time. So however long you can hold it, that tells me a lot about how much your tissues can tolerate right now. And I look at that as a quantitative measure so I can keep tracking it, and I want to see, like, as we keep improving, our strength within this rehab process, are we improving that time under tension? So can you hold it for longer? Are you getting stronger? So just one of the ways that we can quickly track to make sure that, people aren't having any symptoms while they're doing it, and that they are getting stronger with these specific drills that we're implementing.
That's great. And so are you looking at both the strength of somebody and endurance? I mean, would you even use the word endurance? How would you describe like how you're conditioning the athletes? What are some of those important measures or benchmarks that they need to hit if they're not wanting to get an injury?
It really depends on which athlete we're talking about and what they need to do for their sport. So if it's a power lifter, they need to hit heavy numbers, right? They work at heavy volumes a lot. So I want to make sure that they can hit, if they need to hit, 5x5 at 80% of their 1 rep max, that they can do that without feeling any symptoms or having any repercussions, no flare-ups for 24 hours, their pain is at a minimum of anything. So I just kind of use stuff like that for powerlifters, but it's really hard for like a gymnast because I just want to make sure that they're not increasing their pain during things and they're able to return to their baseline within 24 hours and their pain never gets above 6 out of 10. So all these like subjective measures, it's really hard, especially for gymnasts, to be able to like teach them how to like stop before things get too bad. So I just really try to like give them those specific things. Like, okay, if you're feeling anything higher than a 6 out of 10, go ahead and stop. So for each athlete, it's a little bit different, but I can measure progress just by making sure that, they can do more without feeling any symptoms or any flare-ups, and they can handle more volume without feeling, really fatigued and sore the next day. So each sport's different. It's really not a one blanket answer for that one.
No, it seems for the power lifters or weightlifters, it might be easier to control the parameters. Yep. Like you have the weight that they could use, you have the reps and sets, but then a gymnast, they might be doing floor routines or just drills or practices or just practicing. And you might have the length of time. It might be like they might be training for 2 hours, but then they might have a lot of rest breaks during that time, or other days they might be more intense. And so it's hard to gauge that. So you might just be basing it off of their symptom, off of their subjective description of pain.
Yep.
So that's a little complex population to work with. It's the gymnasts that's real tough to be able to work with those group of people. So, I mean, I know I would say the majority, a lot of physical therapists probably don't know how to work with that population unless they've had some previous experience in that. Because when I'm reflecting on my physical therapy education, we didn't go over a population like that. That's very specific. That's something that you're going to get after schooling. And so that's why there's so many differences with physical therapists, that you might have one physical therapist that specializes in sciatic nerve pain or ruling that out. And you might have somebody who's really great at strength, being like a strength coach and working with high level athletes like CrossFitters or powerlifters or gymnasts like yourself. And then others who are just so good at telling stories and explaining things and working with some of the psychological aspects of pain. So there's so many awesome variances in the profession like that. So
yeah, it's really cool. We can do so many things and people have no idea, but yeah, we all have our little specialties or things that we're better at than others. I call myself a movement-based therapist because most of my treatments are movement-based. So when someone comes in, I let them know that I'm not going to be that one that is just going to do manual therapy for an hour, even though sometimes it's necessary to do it, short term, but I like to educate people about the importance of movement and teaching them how to move better for their sport or whatever they're trying to accomplish.
So is there a big component of a home exercise program or like a continuous plan for the people that you work with? What really happens if you're working with them? Are you seeing them a couple times per week, or are you also incorporating their home exercise program or whatever they should be doing on the field or in the gym? How do you tie in the exercises that they do with you with the things that they should be doing at home or on their own?
So I'm only a solo practitioner. I have my own business. And so I can't treat people 3 times a week because if everyone came in 3 times a week, I wouldn't have any more time on my schedule. So a lot of my patients, yeah, I do see them once a week and I give them their exercises to do on their own. I actually put it in an app that I use so then they can track the reps that they're doing, the sets that they're doing. They can send me videos right through there. That's really big for the strength athletes because I know that they usually do most of their work in the gym. So I just give them to that and they're so good at just following through with the plan that I'm not even worried they're going to do it. Then there's, some of the gymnasts, I like to get them in, especially the younger gymnasts, a couple times a week because they're not able to access a strength-based gym. They have a gymnastics gym, but that's not the same thing. So I'll give them things to do during practice if they aren't able to do a certain event, and then I'll just write it down for them. They actually can't have their phones at practice. Some of the gyms around here are really kind of crazy, so I have to physically write it all down on a piece of paper and give it to them, and we have to go through each exercise to make sure that they understand what they need to do during practice. And then when I see them twice a week, then we do some of the other things that are more strength-based that they can't do at practice because they don't have the equipment to do it. So, it depends on the person. It depends on what they have. If they aren't, someone that uses their phone or apps very often, if it's someone that's a little bit older, then I definitely won't do the app sort of thing. I'll take a video of each of them doing their exercises, and then I'll just airdrop them to them. And then they can just follow their plan. And I have already written down the instructions in a note, and then I'll also airdrop that to them too. So it depends on the person. I kind of base it off of what I know that they're actually going to do and they're going to be compliant with.
Yeah, I love your use of technology with having an app where you can they can upload videos and you can see it there. And if they're not that tech savvy, then you can just use their phone and then just airdrop it to them. Where you're giving the home exercise program right there on their, you're giving it to them right on the spot. It's going right onto their phone. So the compliance and their willingness and desire to actually do the home exercise program is going to increase, which means that you're going to get better outcomes that way, as opposed to just getting a piece of paper and just not really having it be explained to you. Or, as far as other techniques in the past, when I've been, in like the older style of giving home exercise sheets is a little bit less personal. And so when there's more of a disconnect and it's not as personal, then it seems like people are not as willing to do it. So the way that you're doing it seems like it makes it that every person will actually do their exercises, which is so important to recovery.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like honestly, the first session, I take everyone through their exercises, I write them all down and I airdrop them to them. And they're like, wow, that's amazing. Like they're used to the old style of like a piece of paper that they're going to lose within 10 minutes and never complete their exercises, nor do they know how to do those specific things on the sheet. So once they've gone through them, they see themselves doing them. They're like, oh, I remember this. I know what to do. And I'm cueing them as they're doing them, so they get that voice of what they need to be doing and feeling and all that stuff too. It's really helpful, especially like nowadays.
Yeah, it's really good. And then just using technology, it just makes our practice so much better. Are you also doing some telehealth as well? Have you gotten into seeing people virtually or remotely?
Yeah, I've done telehealth for about a year now. The boom is right now, obviously, but I've been doing it for a year. I usually only do it one weekend out of every month because I still have a full caseload in person. And so I didn't want to increase, what I have to do. I like to, when I'm at home, just connect and like actually do things at home and, spend some time with my fiance and my dogs because I have 4 dogs. But yeah, over the last year, I've definitely bumped those up a little bit. Right now, I'm doing them as often as I can because there's just so much uncertainty surrounding the situation and when I'm going to be able to go back to work. And then I do a lot of online programs too. So I've created like generic templates for low back pain, for like sciatica, radiculopathy, for hip pain, for shoulder rotator cuff, like stuff like that. And so if people don't need that truly custom program, they don't have like 7 things going on, they can really just focus on buying that one program. And it's only $40 a month, and it's 3 or 4 workouts a week, and it's specific to that injury. And it's things that I do on my own for those patients in person. And now you can access it for $40 a month. Like that's pretty unheard of, and it's very specific. So I do sell a lot of programs at this time, less right now because people don't have access to the gym to do the programs, but in the past I do, yeah, telemedicine, online programming, and in-person stuff.
Yeah, all different forms for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever somebody needs. People have different learning styles.
Yep.
So that's really great. Well, if somebody wants to get in touch with you, if they are maybe an athlete themselves or they're a gymnast and they really need that kind of special care that you can give them, how can they get in contact with you? And also feel free, if you have any free resources, like a free ebook or any kind of thing, you can go ahead and you can promote that here right now.
Okay. Yeah. So if you want to get in touch with me, the best way is through Instagram or Facebook. It's at the Physio Fix. You can send me an email at stacie@thephysiofix.com. Stacie spelled Stacie. Most people don't know how to spell my name, which is fine, but it won't go to me if you don't send it to that email address. So, and I do have a free mobility program right now. You get the first month free. So if you go on my Instagram and if you click on my online programs, it is the coupon code for that for the first month being free is free mobility. It's pretty simple, straightforward. So if you go ahead and input that, then you'll get the first month free. So yeah, that's it.
Not free flexibility, just free mobility.
Free mobility.
Free mobility. We got a controlled
Better.
motion here.
Yeah.
Good. Awesome. Well, I really appreciate your time. Thanks for giving us a lot of great information. And yeah, I wish you well during this difficult time. Hopefully we can all just keep doing telehealth, at least for the next month or two, and help out the clients that we'd love to work with.
Yes, I agree. Yep. Thanks for doing this. Seriously, it was great to have, someone to talk things through, and I'm glad people can learn from you and this amazing resource you're putting together.
Awesome. Thanks a lot. See ya.
Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.